starts with Liberia, because I know you've been outspoken on conflict areas in many places around the world. We work in Liberia. We also do extensive work in Afghanistan, and in Afghanistan, one of our focus changes in different places.
Yes.
So in Afghanistan, what we're really looking at is how do you involve women better in the rebuilding of Afghanistan and Afghanistan's government and rooting out corruption so that you win the hearts and minds of the people. And I think we're very heartened, frankly, by the new administration's emphasis on winning over hearts and minds and on really working with the population. And we've seen where provincial reconstruction teams have brought women in for dialogue. It has borne fruit. Small anecdote, when you'll recall the Kandahar prison break where the Taliban fighters got out, hundreds of them, the first person to inform NATO of that prison break was a woman. And it was 10 minutes before anyone else informed NATO forces about that prison break. And that was because they had been consulting with women all along, and the women felt a connection to those who were seeking to protect them. So you see very concrete ways in which women step forward when they're invited to play a role. We work extensively in Colombia. We've worked extensively with Israeli and Palestinian women. And one of the places, perhaps the place where you've seen women really step forward and fill the shoes of men who have departed for a variety of reasons, is in Rwanda. Rwanda today is the only majority parliament made up of women. 56% of the parliament is women. And that's due to a number of factors, including the support of the government, but very much due to good strategy and solid thinking by the women leaders of Rwanda, who really helped usher the country out of a devastation following the genocide. And you see that they have used a constitutional quota of 30% to not only achieve a thirds representation in all branches of government, but to exceed that. They've gained the trust of the people. They've grown their majority over 2 permanent elections, and they're doing very important and good work.
What has surprised me is how well many of these women are educated with major degrees, and they get the feeling of oppression when they're unable to use what skills they do have, and so they're beginning to look for these outlets, to look for organizations like your organization to help to guide them. And I find this to be with lots of enthusiasm for women that come here for connecting and networking with others, and as you visit those countries. So I feel the motivation, most especially by women and mothers. I wonder, are you connecting any with the UN and working with any committees, or do you feel like they're involved as much as can be?
Well, I don't think they're involved as much as they can be. I think they're, in most war-torn societies, probably all war-torn societies, women are majority of the population. And so when we look at decision-making structures and we see a preponderance, if not a vast majority of men, we can see that women don't have the voice that they need. That having been said, I think we're making progress. This year we'll celebrate the 10th anniversary of what's called UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which sounds like a lot of jargon for the people who are listening. But essentially it was a call by the United Nations member states to get women involved in peace building. And it said you must bring these women into the conversation. And we work very hard to do that. So a couple of concrete examples. When there are donor conferences, which are the conferences set up to say how can we help these war-torn societies rebuild, we are going to dedicate resources to helping these countries recover. We've organized what are called gender symposia, where we bring women to that dialogue and have them speak to the decision makers and say, these are our priorities. This is how we see the needs of society. And I think that that's had a very important impact where it's occurred, and I would like to see that occurring regularly. We also work with the United Nations and bring women to the United Nations on the sides of actual peace negotiations. So in the case of the Uganda negotiations, we brought the few women who were on the negotiating teams, the women who were there as observers who were members of parliament or representatives of civil society, of non-governmental organizations. We brought those women together and said, what do you want inserted into the negotiation, into these talks? And the women went back and they said things like, what we want is additional resources for the education and retraining of former soldiers. We don't want these soldiers to be left without jobs and without resources, because then that will lead to violence again. They said, we want recognition that if you have a ceasefire, it also means no sexual violence, that it doesn't just mean putting down guns. These were very significant changes in the way those talks were held, and they resulted in a substantively different agreement. And I think what that means is it would make a difference if women were there regularly. So yes, we try heartily to put these women, to connect these women with officials in the United Nations, with officials in the U.S. government, officials in other multilateral and bilateral negotiations, so other important organizations that are making the decisions, to say, these women have something to say. It is in your interest as a decision maker to hear what they have to say and to involve them in that discussion.
Well, you know, I've had a number of Israeli and Palestinian women come, and also the Seeds of Peace, the young people, and they so embrace peace and wanting peace. But I'm not sure how much voice they have in those countries. I have written letters. I wrote a letter to President Bush, and I've written letters to the peace negotiators at the table, to plead for women to be involved. I haven't gotten much response. But I really feel very strongly that if women were involved, most especially some of these very able and bright women who visit here, I think we'd see more progress.
Well, it's interesting that you raise that example, because I am cautiously optimistic. And the reason is that Special Envoy Mitchell and Secretary Clinton were both involved in the Northern Ireland peace talks. And in the Northern Ireland peace talks, actually women got a seat at the table. And women got a seat at the table, and they made a difference. They used that seat at the table to make a difference. And I'm hopeful that Clinton and Mitchell will remember the lessons from Northern Ireland in thinking about how you bring women to the table, Israeli and Palestinian women to the table, because they both have been witness to the difference that it makes. You're absolutely right. The Israeli and Palestinian women have a particular interest and drive to push for a peaceful resolution to that conflict. There's an organization we work with that I know you've had some contact with as well, called the International Women's Commission for a Just and Sustainable Palestinian and Israeli Peace. Has some very prominent women, Palestinian women, Israeli women, and international women, who are really looking for ways to solve the conflict. And I think a very important first step would be to involve them in all of this dialogue. For example, there's the conference coming up. I talked about donor conferences earlier. There's a donor conference coming up now for Gaza to help rebuild following the conflict between Israel and Hamas recently. I think it would be an important signal for the IWC, this International Women's Commission, to be included in the conversations about Gaza. I think they have important message to deliver to the international community that ought to be heard. So I'm cautiously optimistic, and I fully endorse your view that it would make a difference, or could make a difference.
I really think that it could. And that is one of my greatest desires, is to see the people recognize the very goodness in each other. And some is really recognized. I mean, I really am convinced that with many of the visitors we have are totally committed to peace. But I'm not sure, that their voices are being heard, but I keep encouraging them to please speak out so that they will be heard. And I'm hoping that every election, I'm hoping that there will be people on both sides who really have a desire for peace and really work in that direction. I do not want to give up on the Middle East and gaining peace.
Yeah, no, I think you should not give up. I mean, if I look at Iraq, for example, we worked in Iraq right around the time of the U.S. overthrow of Saddam Hussein. We brought the very first delegation of Iraqi women here post the U.S. invasion. And what we saw after that was that the women mobilized for their own rights in exactly the democratic way we would have wanted to. They were faced with the threat of having themselves marginalized more than they had even been historically marginalized. And they did letter writing campaigns. They did petitions. They did advocacy. They